Does anyone else struggle in the battle with their flesh? Welcome to the club. As Christians, though we have been reborn and renewed, we will battle with our flesh for the remainder of our time on earth. But one thing is true based on the scriptures. We have hope in this battle with our flesh. We must first understand the difference between the flesh and the spirit. Jesus told Nicodemus, flesh gives birth to flesh, but the spirit gives birth to spirit. In other words, Jesus is telling Nicodemus that a person can be alive physically in the body, but be dead spiritually. A person who has been born again by God's Spirit is made alive spiritually. This means a person lives in the flesh, but is born again. The Apostle Paul elaborates on the conflict of the flesh versus the spirit more extensively than any other New Testament writer. In Paul's writings, the flesh stands for the natural desires of a person operating apart from God. This is why he warned the Galatians when he said, "Are you that foolish? After beginning by means of the Spirit, you are now trying to finish by means of the flesh?" Here, Paul is urging the Galatian Christians to walk in the Spirit and to deny the flesh. This should encourage us Christians today that it is possible to be saved, yet struggle with our flesh. This means that once the spirit of a person has been raised to life by the Spirit of God, the old desires of the flesh do not immediately disappear. There is a battle that rages on. Paul goes on to tell the Galatians, "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh. They are in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want." This brings to mind what Paul says in Romans 7. He says, "I am living in my flesh, and do not understand my own actions. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. It is no longer I who do it, but the sin that dwells within me. I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells within me." What in the world is Paul saying here? Even he battled with his fleshly nature. And if he did, we sure will too. So how do we battle? Those of us who have been raised with Christ are expected to set our hearts on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. We are to set our minds on things above, not on earthly things. Though we battle our flesh, the person who has been brought to spiritual life will want to please God. The truth is, the pull of the world, physical needs, and pleasures are still present. Therefore, the Christian must feed on spiritual food and continually yield to God's Spirit on a day-by-day, minute-by-minute basis. We must be intentional about feeding the Spirit and yielding to the Spirit, which are done by reading, studying, and obeying God's Word, and then giving ourselves all of the means of spiritual nourishment that the Word prescribes, such as prayer and fellowship. The more we get into the Word, the more we will desire what God desires. The more a person gets into the world, the more they will desire what the world desires. The reality is this: living in this world, we will be constantly bombarded with the values and desires of the flesh. It is inevitable. Unless we take steps to counteract those values and desires, we will find ourselves out of step with the Spirit of God who lives within us. It's why God's Word describes the battle with our flesh a war. We must fight, and the fight will last the remainder of our years on this earth.